Welcome to another McBike and Sport fly tying video. In this video today we're going to be tying a Mahoney, which is a Dec Hogan fly, which was originated in the 90s. I believe it was originally to honor a gentleman named Jerry Mahoney. Now he calls it a Spey fly. It's not in the traditional Spey fly in that it has a low set mallard wing, but sort of more in the modern style of Spey flies, maybe in the Syd Glasso sort of tradition, in that it has this particular one has a feather wing, and it's also, it has the characteristic sort of long flowing hackles of a Spey fly. So we're going to start off with a pearl tinsel, pearl mylar tinsel, which looks great in the water when the light hits it. It doesn't look like much, of course, in the video. We're going to tie that on the bottom. And whenever you're tying in several things, we've got several ribs on here. We've got a mylar tinsel, we've got a medium oval tinsel, and of course we've got our hackle. Generally you're going to tie them in the reverse order that you're going to end up using them. So first on is, first on is the first one we're going to use. The last one on is the last one we're going to use. So I don't know if you would call that reverse order or not. So our next piece up is going to be a medium oval silver tinsel. I'm going to tie that on just so it touches the pearl mylar, and just 2 wraps because we don't want to build up a whole lot of bulk. And the last item is, so our hackle for this is going to be a schlappen. Now schlappen as a hackle produces a really nice soft hackle, but the problem using it as a Spey hackle in a pack of strung hackle such as this, you're lucky if you find 3-4 feathers that are suitable for a Spey hackle. So what you're looking for, even if the feather doesn't look overly wide, what you're actually looking at is the length of the barbules. So you want a nice long flowing hackle, and sometimes you like to bring that into this little bit of fluffy stuff if you want, a little bit, but you also have to keep in mind how thick your stem gets towards the bottom. You don't want to be tying on a big huge thick stem at the head area. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to strip off the fluff from the bottom of this one. And the other thing I like to do personally when I'm tying with schlappen, so I'll figure out, you can see this one's got some stress marks up at the front, but like I said, this is the best I've got in this pack at the moment, so I'm going to figure out where I want it to start, which I think is about there. I want to give enough for me to wrap the whole shank. In this case, we're going to go the whole shank. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clip the tip and trim these a little bit, gives it a little bit of grip. Now when I'm using these as a body hackle, what I like to do is also strip the whole half of the top half of the hackle. If you want something a little bit fuller, you can fold it instead. You don't have to do what I'm doing, but I think it lays a little nicer, and it looks a little better when you do that. Now the other thing I like to do to prepare schlappen for a hackle, you can see it's quite webby, so it sticks together. So what I like to do is I'll actually put it in between my lips and run it through like that with a bit of saliva. And what that does is it separates the fibers out so that when you wrap it, it all lays nicely. And then when they dry, they're not really kind of grabbing each other. So you can see there, that's the prepared feather. Call it gross if you want, but that's the way I like to do it, and I do find it works quite well. Okay, so we're going to tie that in right next to our oval silver, and then we're going to wrap forward and just tidy everything up. Now the rear third of this fly is floss. So you want to have nice tight wraps, keep everything together. I try and keep it on the side here so that when we go and lay our floss over top of this, we're going to get a nice tight body without too many lumps or bumps from all of this stuff. The other thing which you can do, which I didn't do, and maybe I should have thought of, is you can actually, so when it comes to your tinsel, you can do it, they call it kind of stripping. So you take your thumb and you just go like this. You can basically expose out the core, and that will thin things down. So give it 2 or 3 wraps just to secure it in, then thin it right out. So once we've got that rear third, I'm not as worried about it. I'm going to wrap this forward up till it meets the return eye. This front 2/3 is going to get covered in seal's fur, so I'm not too worried about what it's going to look like. So I'm just using a single strand floss today. Now normally the Mahoney is tied in red. Today I'm going to be tying it in a blue color because that's what I need in my box, and it's just to show you that you can take a lot of these flies and they may be specific in color. Tie them for what works on your river, and black and blue is a great steelhead combination, obviously, in a lot of different areas. Okay, so this is single strand uni floss in happens to be in the royal blue colorway. You can use other flosses, obviously, if you want. You can use silk if you want to get fancy, although for fishing flies, I kind of like this stuff. It's inexpensive, easy to find. Okay. So you're just going to run your fingers down there a little bit, flatten it out. If your fingers are overly rough, you can wear gloves if you really want to. Again, this is a fishing fly, so I'm not too worried about it. So we're going to do touching wraps. Oops. Out of the way. All the way down, and then we're going to go back up. Now, on blue, it doesn't really matter too much what your underbody is. If you wanted a more vibrant color, like let's say you were using a chartreuse, or you were using even the normal red. You see my fingers are a little rough here, I got some fraying, but oh well, we'll live with it. You can tie your first part of your body, tie it with a white thread, and it'll really pop through. The other thing with some people even like to do is they will tie the rear third in a flat silver tinsel first, and then wrap their floss over and back, or down and back on top of that. Reason being is basically when the floss gets wet, whatever's underneath it tends to kind of shine through a bit. So if you've got black thread underneath there, it's going to blacken down the entire look of everything. Okay, so there's our rear body, and like I said, the front half here, front 2/3, is a seal's fur. Now, I only had this particular color in seal's fur, and I want the whole thing to be more of a royal blue. So what you can actually do is I've taken some black seal's fur, and I've taken that colorway, and I've actually mixed them together. So you just take a pinch of both, and work them back and forth between your fingers like this, just pinching and pulling and mixing until you get them all mixed up, and you get a pretty close approximation to what we're looking for here. Okay, so we're just going to dub that on. You can do a dubbing loop if you want something a little more spiky. You can just do it on as a noodle like I like to do for this sort of thing. I find for noodles the easiest way is get it started, bring it up, do a wrap or two, and what that's going to do is that's going to catch in the front part, and now it's much easier to spin your dubbing on, and it's not going to just keep spinning endlessly without hooking up. So I'm going to keep it reasonably spiky. Bring that forward. Catching the hackle. And at the front of this, we're going to have a guinea hackle, so we don't want to come too far forward. We're going to leave a little bit of room for that. I'll just put on a little pinch more dubbing. Pinch more than that. Okay, there we go. There's our dub body. You can take a Velcro brush, or you can take a toothbrush that you've cut off and rough that up a bit if you want to. So now we're going to start with our ribs. So we're starting off with our pearl tinsel. Okay, so fairly open wraps, because we are going to put the other one in next to here. Going for 2 on the back. 4 or 5 sort of overall is, I think, kind of the accepted norm. Okay, so there's our pearl tinsel in. Clip off your excess. That's, by the way, one way. If you take your finger, if you're just starting out fly tying, a lot of times you'll go to cut something like that and you'll snip your thread. If you take your finger, push your thread back like that, then when you move into snip, you know you're not going to catch your thread. Okay, then we're going to bring forward our silver medium tinsel, following the pearl. Okay. And that pearl, you can see it's really hard to even see now on the video, but when you get that out in the water and the light hits it, and if it's a decent day, it really does pop. It's a great material. Looks great out there. So this type of a fly, I like this fly for right now the weather's kind of changing up a bit. We have been doing quite a bit of dry fly fishing, and it's been great. But the weather's changing up a little bit, more overcasts from time to time. Water maybe is chilling out a little bit. You might want to fish the wet fly a little bit, but your gear set up lighter weight for dry fly. Maybe you don't have 2 rods, that sort of thing. And so I like a fly like this that's going to end up with a reasonable profile, but isn't so heavy that it's really hard to chuck. You don't want to have you don't want to have to switch up to your Skagit line, I guess is what I'm saying. So it's nice to have something like this. So this one, we're going to make sure it lays down nice and flat, or not nice and flat, but right. We're going to lay it down right next to the tinsel. Okay, you have to just kind of stroke that thing back. And when you put it down right behind the oval tinsel like that, it's also going to protect the hackle, because it sits down in the seal fur, protected in behind the bump of that medium tinsel, the oval tinsel. So this has a purpose. There's a bit of a purpose for doing all of this as well. Okay. Now when we get to the head, this depends on your personal preference as to how much weight you want to have here. But I'm going to give it a couple of turns at least. This is also where the length is in our schlappen, and so we want a bit of flow to the whole thing. So I'm going to give it 2. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, I think that's enough. We'll give it 3 wraps and then tie it off. And when I tie off like that, I like to personally figure out where it's going to be. I'll strip off the remainder of the barbules just to give me a bare quill to work with. Wrap it forward a couple, peel it back, fold everything back, and in this case I'm going to fold them down in preparation for the feather wing, which we're going to tie in, and then keep that quill on the bottom so that we keep our top surface nice and clean for putting in our feather wing, and clip off your excess. Okay, so our next hackle is going to be a guinea fowl feather. Now, guinea fowl I find is similar to schlappen in that in a pack of feathers, you know, there's not a ton of usable material. So you want to kind of work through, and don't be afraid to throw out your feathers. If they're skinny and thick stems and stiff and whatever else, there's nothing that says you have to use them. So you can see on these what happens. I stripped the fluff off that, but they do get quite thick in the stem in a hurry. So this was where all the fluff was, and now you can see this would be too thick to tie off in here. And we're only going to get a couple, we only want a couple turns, 1 turn, maybe 2 turns, just to give it some contrast. And so we're not too worried. We just want a little bit of a little hit. So we don't need to get into the thick part trying to get a whole bunch of turns of this in. So tie that in tip first. 1, 2, 3. Fold the tip back is what I like to do. You know, always thinking of ways to make sure the fly is going to be a little more durable when I'm tying a fishing fly. If you're tying something for presentation, you're a little more concerned with things like bulk in the head and appearance and all those things. When you're tying a fishing fly, you want it to be aesthetically pleasing. That's important, but more than anything, you want it to last a little while in the fish when you're out there fishing. So I like to wet my fingers and fold these back is how I do my folding. You can also take a scissor and run it along the stem with a bit of pressure, and that will also fold your hackle. So whichever way you prefer. I find this works just fine, and then I fold it as I go as well. So like I said, we're not going for a lot here. 1, maybe 2 wraps. There's 1. We're definitely going to go 2. It would have been nicer to have a slightly longer guinea, but this is, again, what I have to work with. And, you know, it's the fish aren't going to notice the difference, really. Doesn't make that much difference. Okay, so wrap it off. Pull everything back. Bend your stem forward, pull it all back, tidy it up. We want to make sure we have a nice, flat, clean area because we're going to be doing our feather wing next. Okay, so take the whole thing, I'm just going to pull it down a little bit, sort of separate it out in half, sweep everything down. If you've got a really big bump on top, you can trim out some of these little guys if you want. Okay. Bring everything down. And now we're going to do our feather wings. So what we're using for our wing is cock cape, cock neck, whichever you want to call it, Chinese. And what we're doing is we're going to select a feather from each side of the neck, and they have sort of a natural curve to them. And when you select one from either side and put them back to back, you're going to get that nice fit on your hook. Now, if you don't have a full cape and you just have a pack of strung hackle, it's a little harder to do, but what I actually find you can do is if you take the feather and you take the back of your nail and pinch it and run it down the feather, kind of like you would if you were curling up a ribbon. You know, you take it on the back of the scissors and run it down. You can encourage a feather that is bent one way to bend the other way, because usually in a pack of strung hackle they all run the same way. But ideally what you want to do, especially if you're going to tie quite a few flies, get yourself one of these necks. They're inexpensive. You can see there's lots of feathers on them, and there's lots of variety in sizes as well too. So there's a fairly big one, and there's some smaller ones. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be tying 4 hackle tips, so 2 on each side. So I've got 2 here for the near side, and I like those to come to just about the back of the hook. Some people do them shorter, say to the back of the body. I like to go a little bit longer. Oh, and by the way, in this particular fly, because we're not doing a tag on it, some people do like to put on a silver, flat silver tinsel tag. I've just kind of lined it up in line with the point of the hook. So we're just going to size those up, and then we're going to take all the fluff, strip that off. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing with the other two. Now the easiest way to get these all working out the same is to take your other two feathers, okay, line them up by their tips. So take the two tips, hold them together like that, and then take your near set and line those tips up, and then you know where to pinch off your fluff. And okay, so we've got our 4 hackles all lined up. Now, if you've developed quite a bump here, there's a little trick you can do. You can take a pair of flat pliers, something like that, that have a little bit of, I don't know if you can see that, a little bit of width to them. And you can kind of put a little bit of a kink in there. So if you place them like this, so that your hackle tips are all nicely lined up, and give it just a little bit of a kink down, and then move forward a tiny bit and give it a little bit of a kink the opposite way, you create what some people call a Z-bend. So you kind of fold them like that. I don't know if you can see that. So put them in there like that, and then pinch them with the back of your thumbnail, fingernail like that. You've created a kink. Move your pliers a little bit forward, create a kink the opposite direction. And you've kind of created a little bit of a bump you can use to get over hump and make them lie a little nicer. Now again, in the interests of durability, and you don't have to do this if you're trying more of a presentation style, I like to feed those through the eye of the hook. Okay, line them up where I want them. Do one soft wrap. Get a little bit of wax on our thread. Okay. Okay, sorry, I had a little interruption there. So we've run them through the eye. Pull everything back. And we're just going to throw down a couple wraps. Check that it's all sitting the way you want it to. I like that. Like I said, I like my hackle just a little bit longer than some, so you may not want to go quite that long, but that's personally my preference. Okay. And it's and if it's not sitting low enough for you on the hook, you can also just kind of rework that bend again as well. So that's looking pretty good to me. Now, after you've done that, take all of your hackles, pull them back hard so that you can hopefully get them a little bit through the split on the front. Now you can see how much durability, obviously, this is going to add to your fly as opposed to just doing them on the top. And then get in there nice and tight before you come to the very back of your head. Snip off your 4 quills. Careful not to cut your thread, of course. And then the last thing we're going to do is just tidy it all up. Okay, so there we go. Take a look on the bottom as well. Make sure that you've got in there to cover up those stems. And they will definitely, at the tip here, they're definitely going to show through a little bit. And this is why I'm saying this is not a presentation way to do this fly. But I'm not doing this for presentation. I am doing this for fishing. So durability is my key aspect, not how beautiful it is. Alright, so last thing of course is your standard whip finish. 2, 3, 4. Okay, put a little head cement on there and you are done and good to go. And you can see this has quite a bit of mobility in the water. The slightly stiffer guinea gives it a nice profile, same with the featherwing. You get a good profile in the water, but overall not a big heavy fly to be chucking, but it still has some presence in the water. Great for this time of the year when you're kind of switching back and forth between dry fly and wet fly, and you don't need to go to those big intruders, heavy sink tips, that sort of thing. So give it a try. You can tie them in any color combo you want. Chartreuse, the original red. I've seen them done in pink. Orange with pink body is a nice combo as well. Great fly. And hopefully we'll see you out there on the river. Get your supplies at McBike and Sport when you're here visiting us in the Bulkley Valley.